Welcome to A Gentleman's Review. My name is Art Hampton. I'm your host, bringing you the news that the mainstream propaganda does not. And today, joining with me is Rebecca Terrell. She is a contributor to the New American magazine since 2009. Rebecca joined the staff as a senior editor in 2022 with a focus on health, energy, and environmental issues. Her background includes experience in both public and private sectors, as well as education, healthcare. She served as a legislative aide on international affairs to U.S. Congressman Ron Paul and authorized his American Sovereignty Restoration Act to withdraw the United States membership in the United Nations. And today we have her going to talk about the United Nations, what they are, and have their agendas changed since Trump has taken office. Thank you for joining us, Rebecca.
Thank you, Art, for having me. It's nice to see you.
So tell us more about the UN. What are they good or are they bad? I heard Trey Gowdy say that we're the powerhouse of the world and we don't need to get out of the UN because we need to keep everybody else in check.
Right, exactly. I think the way you keep people in check is by focusing on yourself and your own strengths, right? We have to just say the UN is a godless organization. So without God, you can do no good. But just from a political perspective, the times in our nation's history when we have had the strongest economy, when we have had the greatest growth, have been when we had a protectionist stance, high tariffs and the Monroe Doctrine and all of this. You pay attention to your own business. Europe and the rest of the world will pay attention to ours, and we'll all get along quite well. And you have to remember too that the United Nations, when it was founded in 1945, the United States had soundly rejected its predecessor, the League of Nations, which was formed after World War I. And then lo and behold, when they didn't get their way, the globalists, fomented another war, World War II. And then right on the heels of that, here comes the United Nations to make the world safe and peaceful, right? Like we see so much of that since 1945. I think that the latter half of the 20th century has been the most war-ridden time of history, in recorded history. So you have to say, we have enough history now with the United Nations to know it doesn't hold to its promises. It's not actually accomplishing what it says, what the narrative says it's going to accomplish. It is leading us on a very short path to world tyranny. So, which is exactly what its framers intended. And we have this in their own words. We don't have to put on tinfoil hats and pretend like, use their narrative. We have this in their own words. And I'm sure we're going to talk about that now.
So it's not conspiracy theory. It's just here it is.
It's conspiracy fact.
It's a fact, yeah. And I don't even
Right.
think it's a conspiracy anymore because a conspiracy requires secrecy. They're just open about what they're doing, what their goals are, and it seems like I guess the deep state, which is the term now, or leftist insider elites.
Right.
When they propose something and it gets rejected, they just repackage it, name it something else, and push forward with it. So we had the League of Nations. We rejected that ideology, and then they come up with this. Here it is, the UN, and you see that across the board. Oh, here's critical race theory. Well, we don't want critical race theory. Oh no, this is DEI or
Right.
SEL repack, which is basically critical race theory just repackaged. And here we have the
Sure.
UN, which is a repackaged League of Nations.
Right, absolutely. In fact, we know that is so very true that when the United Nations was established, we know that the international headquarters of the United Nations is in New York, correct? But the international headquarters of the League of Nations was in Switzerland. They literally changed the sign at the road from League of Nations to the United Nations, and business went on exactly as usual. Now, the reason we got that headquarters in New York was exclusively because of Rockefeller. He did not want the United States to back out, and he donated that land in New York. And now, believe it or not, that land, that few number of acres right there, on which the headquarters says not United States property.
Oh,
Isn't
wow.
that interesting? Yeah. It's United Nations property, and it was given to them by John D. Rockefeller. So that's an interesting history in and of itself. But he didn't want the United States back, coming to its senses and backing out again. Of course, too, you have to remember that we, when at the founding, we had a number of delegates at the founding of the United Nations in San Francisco in 1945. The lead delegate was Alger Hiss, and he was later proven to be a communist spy. We know, though, that he had been handpicked by John Foster Dulles. Now, he's one of the most pivotal, he's as important as Rockefeller, really, but people don't know his name as well. He actually concocted the League of Nations. He was really the father of the League of Nations. He, along with Edward Mandell House, who was the main advisor to Woodrow Wilson, and those were the kind of the trio who got the League of Nations promoted and born. He was also a founding member of the Council on Foreign Relations. So you see all of these same names coming up, all of these same players, and their hand-picked successors, which have proceeded on down to this very day. I mean, like, for instance, George Bush was handpicked by them, and everybody all the way down. Everybody says, "Oh, the 2020 election was stolen." Well, so is the 2016 election, and so is the 2012 election. Every election has been, actually 2016 wasn't. I think that was where they were a little bit shocked because they were going to put Hillary Clinton in, and their normal methods of cheating didn't work, so they were like, oops, we can't let that happen again. That's why they showed their hand too much in 2020. That's my belief. But you remember that Hillary Clinton actually said, when she was Secretary of State, when the CFR opened an office in Washington, D.C., she said, "Oh, good, I won't have to travel as far to be told what I need to be doing." She admitted it right there in that statement. The CFR pulls the strings. The members of the CFR, and again, it's like you just said. Yeah, they have all these organizations. They have the CFR and the Trilateral Commission, and now the World Economic Forum, which is taken over. All these little think tank type groups. These little, oh well, we don't have any pull in the government. We just get together and talk about policies and issues. Well, yeah, they do have pull in the government. They've been fomenting all of this. All of them are the same people who arrived at Dunbarton Oaks Manor in Washington, D.C. in 1944, and they planned out the United Nations. They said, how are we going to turn the League of Nations into the United Nations? And it was the same people who ended up being our delegates to the founding of the UN in 1945. And everything too that you've seen the United Nations do since then, like in 1948, the United Nations established the modern state of Israel. Everybody's like, there's a big fight now over, oh, support Israel, oh, support, oh, if you don't support Israel, you're supporting Hamas. No, they founded the modern state of Israel to keep fomenting discord over there and create war. War makes money for these people. We know that they founded these same people, the same people who've formed the League of Nations and the Council on Foreign Relations, and later on the United Nations. They formed the Federal Reserve. They formed all of these other international organizations, and they also formed the Bank of International Settlements in 1930. That is headquartered in Basel, Switzerland. It is governed by no laws of any country. The Bank of International Settlements has funded both sides in almost all wars, starting with World War II on. Any war you can name. And all these same internationalist bankers are funding both sides in Ukraine and funding both sides in Israel right now. I can promise you, because they have to keep that war fomented. And I even have a theory that that's why they allowed Donald Trump to be elected president this time, because they're leading us into World War III, and they need a president who has a bunch of guys behind him going, USA, USA, the patriots, and, the rallying cry to defend democracy across the globe. That's not our game. We're supposed to defend our republic, not a democracy. We're supposed to defend our republic here on our home turf, defend our republic from foreign invasion, not keep the world safe for democracy. That's a lie.
Well, it's simply globalist speech,
Right.
globalist propaganda, really. We hear people talking, or I hear people talking like that all the time. Well, we need to take care of people. I'm like, well, let's let them, when the whole thing with Ukraine exploded, people come up and asking me, and I said, well, you got one communist dictator fighting another communist dictator. Both of them are young globalist leaders, Klaus Schwab cronies, and
Hmm.
let them have at it. I mean, we don't need to send our boys over there to go and fight and die for what? For what?
Right.
Absolutely
Right.
nothing. Israel's the same way. And J.D. Vance, people don't talk about this. He is a neocon. He likes
Oh
war
yeah.
as well. Now, he doesn't want us to
Sure.
go into the Ukraine, but so he's not as big of neocon as like John Bolton, war everywhere. But he's still a neocon. He still wants us
He'll
in
do what he's
Israel. He
told.
still, yeah, he still wants us, in
Yeah.
Taiwan, Korea, and all these other places. And so, and I've said this once, I'll say it again. J.D. Vance is the H.W. Bush to Trump.
Right.
And so they're setting it up to have him pay the way to do that. And,
Right. Well,
but
and the
let's,
long and the short of it is with the UN is that there's another point about Dulles, John Foster Dulles. He helped write the UN Charter, and if you read the UN Charter and you compare it to the United States Constitution, they're diametrically opposed.
right,
Of course, the United States Constitution doesn't specifically mention that our rights come from God, like our Declaration of Independence does. But there's nothing about the UN that declares any rights come from God. Really, if you read between the lines, you see very quickly they believe rights come from government. If government can give you rights, government can take them away.
right,
So that right there is the fundamental, in a nutshell, what's wrong with the United Nations. But then too, we have to look at the track record. Anytime a United Nations peacekeeping operation happens, what happens? They establish a dictatorship. They come in there and they kill, mass slaughter innocent women and children, innocent men too. They establish communist dictatorships. Look all across Eastern Europe. Look through Africa. All across the world, there are so many examples of this. The peacekeeping troops come in. There are always complaints, without exception, of raping and pillaging and all of these horrible things that happen. And now what's come out most recently is all of the human trafficking and the child trafficking that goes on with these UN missions, and whether they're peacekeeping missions or just humanitarian aid missions. We've seen how the United Nations, some of its NGOs and some of its agencies have gone in to help, for instance, in African and South American countries with tetanus inoculation campaigns, only to find out later that what they were actually doing was they were targeting only women of childbearing age. And then we found out that the tetanus vaccine had sterilization agents in it. And that's happened time and time and time again. We also know the United Nations actually has partnered with a company, believe it or not, out of North Carolina. They started at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, the same place infamous now for its collaboration with Fauci and with the Wuhan Institute over in China. It's called IPAS, and it's a manual suction abortion device. And they take this specifically to countries in in Central and South America, where abortion is still illegal, to allow women to conduct their own abortions at home. And I cannot emphasize to you enough how very, very dangerous that is, not just for the baby. Of course, the baby's going to die, but for the woman too. Many women die when they try to self-administer abortion. And that's truly the unsafe. They say, oh, you can't take away Roe v. Wade. It'll make abortion unsafe again. No, 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 no. The UN is making abortion unsafe by doing this and abrogating country laws, that illegal action and that immoral action. So, I mean, and the list could go on. I mean, it's just, look at what they're doing financially. They're calling for central bank digital currencies, and they want our currencies to be programmable so they can decide how much we spend, how much we save, what we spend it on, where we spend it. I mean, it goes on and on and on. There are so many reasons to object to it. And that's why ever since 1945, there have been many brave congressmen who have stepped up to to enter introduce legislation to get us out of the United Nations. When I worked for Congressman Ron Paul, I actually compiled all of those bills that had ever been introduced, and they were very similar to each other. So what I did was just just kind of collate them into one bill. The most important part of it was repealing the United Nations Participation Act, which our Congress actually did pass. And to repeal that act, we have to remember we fund almost a quarter of the United Nations regular budget, and that doesn't count all of the other donations that we make to the United Nations by way of foreign aid and all sorts of other ways. So if we pulled out, the United Nations really couldn't go on, or it would be as effective as the League of Nations was before, which wasn't very, but the League of Nations kind of held on while they regrouped and recharged
Yeah.
for but so there you go. That's it.
So, what you mentioned some of the stated goals of the United Nations, and I think one of them. Well, I don't think I know one of them is population control. That's why you see them pushing
Sure.
abortion, and if the mother dies with a string on, well, that's fine. We're
Yep.
overpopulated anyway. Bill Gates has talked about that. And so, where do they state their goals? Do they openly do that? I know there was a video
Absolutely.
that went out about 8 predictions that the World Economic Forum had. That video,
Right.
and you look at them, and they're like, "Wait a minute, I don't know if that's
Right.
you're going to eat a lot less meat. You're going to a few countries will dominate." So is there anything like that that the UN publishes that just blatantly states what they want?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, Maurice Strong is the grandfather of all of the environmental programs in the United Nations under that United Nations umbrella. Of course, this all goes back. You said exactly what the goal is. So let's start out by talking about the goal. The goal is depopulation, and we know that. We know that from many writing of their own writings. Maurice Strong even talked about it, even talked about reducing the population to make things more manageable, there. He's one of those people who believes that there are too many people in the world, right? And there are too many of those people who think that. But it really goes back to Thomas Malthus, right? The English, was he a pastor as well as an economist? And he preached that pretty soon the population would grow to such an extent that it would so encumber the earth as to basically kill the earth, as opposed to God knows what he's doing. God created this, the more carbon dioxide we have in the atmosphere, the greener the world is, the more we can feed people. It wasn't, his was very a dystopic view of the future. And many people have latched onto that. Margaret Sanger, for instance, with Planned Parenthood. And we have in her writings, we have to get rid of those populations we don't want on this earth. She'll say words to that effect. Ruth Bader Ginsburg even said that when she was describing to a reporter why she voted for Roe v. Wade. That she said, well, that was because we wanted to get rid of populations that we didn't want as many of that particular population. And of course, the reference there, the inference there would be the black, brown, and red babies of the world. That they don't want that many. Well, our policies have all gone right in sync with all of these United Nations policies too. So after once Planned Parenthood was established, then the Club of Rome was established. And that was specifically established for the purpose of depopulation. They say in one of their books published in the early 70s that we've settled on the common denominator enemy of Earth, and that is humanity. And so we have to get rid of humanity. This was about the time that Paul Ehrlich's book, The Population Bomb, had come out, and talking about how, soon the population's going to be so humongous on Earth that the Earth can't sustain the population anymore, and we're all going to die. Believe it or not, Jacques Cousteau, environmentalist extraordinaire, he actually made in the UNESCO Courier in I think it was 1992, a reporter quoted him as saying that we had to get rid of 350,000 people per day in order to save the Earth. He actually made that astounding quantifier, right there. So, and this was all favorably received, by and reported by the United Nations. Then in comes Maurice Strong, who took his cues from the Club of Rome, and he established the United Nations Environmental Program. And everything that you see, everything that he has always pushed. Now he's deceased now, but he has constantly pushed that we need to basically. I'm saying this in a nutshell because I don't have any of his direct quotes right in front of me, but in a nutshell, we need to collapse the world's economies to wipe out enough of the population and then take control, central control, under the United Nations. Even George Bush, our president, he wanted to see us hand our military power over to the Security Council of the United Nations. And he said that the war in Iraq was helping to lead us there. And he said this right in front of Congress and everybody. These are not, again, like you said at the beginning, this isn't the realm of conspiracy theory. These are their own words. Actually, the New American Magazine is going to be coming out, I think it's in July, with a special issue on the United Nations where we're going to be talking about all of this. We're going to be talking about the influence of the United Nations on not just our economy, but on education, on the war on children, and that's not just abortion. That also hits on all of the child trafficking that's going on under the auspices of the United Nations. It's absolutely horrific. And every other conceivable angle, but we also know, going back to the environment, and they are using the environment. They're like, oh, if we can make the environment the victim, we can make humanity the culprit, the bad guy, right? And so George Bush signed us on to Agenda 21 in the 1990s, and every single administration since then has expanded our participation in Agenda 21. Agenda 2030 falls under that umbrella. It's more tailored and specific. It has its 17 sustainable development goals. And if you read those, you go, there's not one area of our lives that is not affected by those sustainable development goals. And there is not one place on this globe you can go, even the most remote village in Africa, that you are not going to hear about sustainable development initiatives. So they are taking over worldwide. They're doing it a little bit differently in our country, though, because of the way our government was so wisely set up by our founders. As local control was very important to the founders because they were students of history and they knew that the tendency of governments is to tyranny. They were trying to keep central control from happening. They were trying to prevent a strong central government because they knew that was a short path to tyranny. And I guess in a way you could say they were buying us time by putting control in the hands of the states. And the states are superior to the federal government, or supposed to be. That's not the way our federal government acts these days, is it? So, but we're gonna get into more about that when we start talking about carbon capture pipelines in a little while.
Well, I always like to say we're not the United States of America, we're the United States of America. And I don't know if you caught that interview with Tucker Carlson and Putin. And I don't know if I was the only one that caught it, but Putin said from his own mouth, a communist, you basically, you're Americans, you're so inefficient. You have all these state governments and all these other I would eliminate all of them and just have one legislator in D.C. And I'm like, well, that's centralization of power. That's the very thing that our founders set up, like you said, to prevent tyranny, is to have the lesser magistrates stand up to the greater magistrates, the decentralization of power. And there you have it. Putin, a communist, saying that he would get rid of that and give up their sovereignty and give up their power to a larger group or the greater magistrate. And I was like, wow, did anybody else catch that? And I was like, no, I guess I got, okay. But so talk a little bit more about carbon capture pipelines.
Well, carbon capture pipelines are really a microcosm of what they have planned for us in the Sustainable Development Goals of Agenda 2030. And I know you're like, what? How could carbon capture pipelines be they're a great example. They're a great illustration of what's going on because now the narrative is, of course, we have to save Mother Earth from all of this carbon dioxide that we're belching out into the atmosphere. Well, let's just establish first, can we all agree that carbon dioxide is not a pollutant? It is a naturally occurring molecule. It is plant food. It feeds our food. We know from the historic record that rises in temperature, whether globally or even on micro scale, rises in temperature always precede. They seem to foment a rise in carbon dioxide, not the other way around. So it's not carbon dioxide goes up and then the temperature goes up. It's the other way around. Okay. We also know that the carbon capture is something that I'll just explain it really quickly. It means that any industrial facilities, they will capture their emissions from their smokestacks, and they will separate out the carbon dioxide from those emissions. They will sequester it. They'll condense it down into its liquefied form under very, very high pressure, and they will put it through pipelines. And normally, until recently, it has been used in a process called enhanced oil recovery. The supercritical, that liquefied under high pressure CO2, is called fracking fluid. And we're all familiar with fracking, right? What they do is they inject it into oil and gas wells that would otherwise be depleted, but it makes it easier to extract more of those natural resources from otherwise depleted wells. It's something that we actually already have 5,000 miles of carbon capture pipeline in this country. And it's used, again, for enhanced oil recovery. They're usually very short. They're not long pipelines, because the facilities are right there, and they just pipe it to the wells nearby and use it as fracking fluid. Now we are looking at thousands and thousands of miles. In fact, the Department of Energy in 2022 said that they're going to use carbon capture pipelines, and they're planning on installing 96,000 miles of carbon capture pipeline in this country alone to help stave off all of this rising atmospheric carbon dioxide and save Mother Earth. Well, we know that they know that that's not true. Because for starters, the process of capturing the carbon is so energy intensive that you're actually releasing more carbon from the power plant than you're capturing. So in order to capture 1 ton of carbon dioxide, you're releasing between 1.5 and 2 tons of carbon dioxide from the power plant. So we know right there, and they know that this is demonstrably true. This is on paper. You can do the math. It's simple for an elementary school student could do this. So we know that their agenda is something else. Well, they happen to be putting these pipelines through some of the most valuable farmland. Right now, they're attacking the Great Plains, South Dakota, North Dakota, Nebraska, Minnesota, Iowa. Those are the states right now that are being targeted by a company called Summit Carbon Solutions. Now, what's in it for Summit Carbon Solutions? Well, the answer to that is literally billions of dollars of taxpayer money in federal subsidies. I told you that back in the 90s, President Bush signed us on to Agenda 21. Well, back then, too, they also added a little part to the IRS tax code called 45Q, where these companies who capture their emissions can get tax credits for capturing a certain dollar amount per ton of carbon dioxide that you capture. It's totally on the honor system. The company can claim it captured as much carbon dioxide as it wants to. It can say, I captured 1 million tons, I captured 1 billion tons. It's totally, they don't do any checking. They're like, oh, okay, you captured that many tons, here's your tax credit. But every single administration since Bush, whether they're Republican or Democrat, and including Trump's first administration, they upped that dollar amount available in the 45Q tax credit. And they also added a direct pay loophole. So now companies who want to put in this pipeline, they can say they captured as much carbon dioxide as they want to. They can make up a number. They can, instead of getting a tax credit, they can get cash in hand for that carbon dioxide that they captured. And they can get even more cash if they sequester it rather than using it for enhanced oil recovery. So now you're starting to see, oh, okay, these are for-profit companies, and they're going through valuable farmland with this pipeline. And you think, okay, well, let them put the pipeline in, and the farmers can just farm over the pipeline. It's not that easy. Those easements don't read that way. That easement becomes the property of that pipeline company. That pipeline company can use it for whatever it wants to. It can restrict the farmer's use of it. The farmer still has the tax liability for it. Still
Right.
has the insurance liability for it. He has no say over what happens on that property. It's a 100-foot easement. It's tearing up the underground drainage systems that have been put all throughout the Great Plains. I mean, tile plowing, I don't know if you're familiar with that, but tile, uh, it, it drains water from low-lying areas in a field to make more of the field, make the field more productive. It can even be used not just for drainage, but also for irrigation downstream. So if you mess up that underground drainage system, you're messing up everything in that field as well as anything downstream. All right. So what this is a land grab, because that company can even sublease that property to a foreign entity. And we've had that problem with China coming in and trying to grab up land all across the United States, right? Especially close to military bases. Speaking of military, the Pentagon, the supercritical CO2 under that very, very high pressure is considered by the Pentagon. I interviewed a lady who works for the Pentagon as a contractor. She said supercritical CO2 is considered a weapon of mass destruction by the United States Pentagon. Because if there's a rupture, and there are ruptures, there have been ruptures, and they have been very, very damaging, that supercritical CO2 immediately turns back into a gas when it hits the atmosphere. But it is heavier than air. Think of dry ice. That's carbon dioxide. Think of your fire extinguisher in your kitchen. The reason that's carbon dioxide. The reason you shoot it at the fire is because it displaces oxygen, and fire needs oxygen to burn, right? So this supercritical CO2 immediately turns back into a gaseous state. It acts like a fluid, though, because it's heavier than air, and it starts to roll, it starts to flow with the contours of the land. In February of 2020, a rupture happened outside the tiny village of Satarsha, Mississippi, and that carbon dioxide flowed right into town, and people start dropping. Now, it's not in the
Wow.
same concentration everywhere, so some people are, they're gagging for air, and they go to get in their cars to drive away. Car won't start because internal combustion engines need oxygen to run.
Right.
Right. They called 911. 911 didn't know what to do. Nobody knew, hey, shelter in place on the second floor of your house. If they'd known to shelter in place, because this is acting like a fluid, it's acting like water. If you're running from a flood, you go up, right? They didn't
Yeah.
know that. The emergency crews, when they came in, their emergency vehicles shut down. They can't run without oxygen, and nobody can see it. It's the only reason they could see it. The people in Satarsha report that they saw a cloud. That's because it had blown a 40 feet down into the earth. It had blown this huge hole when it exploded. This pipeline rupture. Ask me how the rupture happened. It wasn't an earthquake or some crazy situation. It was seasonal flooding that caused the ground to shift, and the pipe gave way. It's a guillotine fracture. It looks like you took a knife and just cut that pipe in two, and it blew this hole. And so there's all this dirt and all this, just everything in the air, and that's why the people saw a cloud. But the supercritical CO2 itself is odorless, it's colorless, and so you can't see it. You can't see when it's coming necessarily, unless there's debris in it. And so the people of Satarsha, luckily, they weren't asleep. The emergency crews said if that had happened at night when people were sleeping, the town would have been wiped out. But they were able to get out. Most of them went to the hospital that night. The whole area had to be evacuated. 250 people in the very rural area had to be evacuated. They couldn't get back into their homes for well more than 24 hours, because even though the carbon dioxide had, it went ahead and flowed, and it flowed on out of town, the actual incident didn't last that long, but the carbon dioxide had concentrated itself inside the houses because it didn't have wind or anything to blow it away. And so the houses had to all be opened up and aired out, and the big blowers brought in before the people could come back into their houses, because the carbon dioxide levels were still at a dangerous level inside those houses 24 hours after this incident occurred. So now you have these companies coming in, standing to make tons of money, billions, literally billions of dollars off the American taxpayer, putting in this pipeline. And I interviewed one farmer. He said, if you look at their map of where they plan to put this pipeline through Iowa, it's almost like they tried to get it as close as they could to the highest population areas, the highest population density, closest to the towns. If you've ever driven through to Iowa, you know there are a lot more cows than there are people in that state. And there are not a lot of high population density areas. And that is exactly where they've put the path of this pipeline. They put it close to residences, close to schools, close to hospitals, close to old folks' homes. They're suing counties who try to implement setback ordinances, not just for safety reasons, but think about too, a county commission is there to ensure the future economic growth of the county, right? So, I mean, these places that go, okay, that area right there where you want to put the pipeline, that's not developed yet, but we're planning development in the next 10, 20, 30 years. No, you can't put a dangerous pipeline like this in. They're suing the counties. And they're suing people too when they refuse to sign the easements and sign this land over that they want to be able to hand down to future generations. They're suing them in condemnation lawsuits for eminent domain, using eminent domain for this because supposedly it's a public good. We're saving Mother Earth after all, aren't we? Right? No, we're not. They're getting money and they know it. They know this is greed. This is pure, simple greed. But from the UN standpoint, it is also a land grab. And we know that they are wanting, back in the 1970s, they had a UN conference. I want to say it was in Vancouver. It was on human settlements. That sound odd. That doesn't sound odd to our ears now, but from 1976, that was kind of an odd thing to hear. Human settlements, that UN conference declared that private ownership of land stifles equality. It stifles advancement of people. It's not good. We need to get rid of private ownership of land. So they've implemented the 30 by 30 initiative. Now, this comes from the UN. President Biden implemented it here last year by issuing I forget what the executive order number was, but he called it America the Beautiful, where 30% of land and waterways in the United States will be turned over to federal ownership by 2030. They're already a long way toward that because they already own like more than a quarter of land in the United States. The federal government does. But then it's going to they're not going to stop there because they also have the 50 by 50 initiative planned, which is 50% of land and waterways under they call it federal protection because of course we're protecting this for future generations. No, 50% of land and waterways owned by the federal government by 2050. Where do we all go? They've answered that question too. Shortly after the 2015 Paris Environmental Conference, again, it's always about the environment, where the environment's the victim and people are the culprit. Shortly after that, the UN's Carlos Moreno published the book 15-Minute Cities, and this is our path to the future. They are going to shuttle us into 15-minute cities. Where the theory is that everything you need in life is within a 15-minute walk or bicycle ride. Notice I did not say car because there's no room for cars in this future dystopia they have planned for us. Now, again, that sounds like science fiction. They're already doing it. They have already partitioned, for instance, Oxford, England. There are 6 zones there now. They're 15-minute zones. You have to have a pass during certain times of the day to travel outside your zone. They're planning it Gavin Newsom let it slip after those fires out in LA. Are going to build back better. And he used all the verbiage about we're building back 15-minute city zones in the LA area. They're doing this in Tucson, Arizona. They're doing it all. They're even building these things from the ground up. The LEAP project outside Lebanon, Indiana. It's LEAP, and you can look it up online. It's very fancy and glossy, and you'll be very impressed with everything that they have planned. But it's a 15-minute city that's funded by the Indiana Economic Development Commission. Now, that Economic Development Commission for Indiana, curiously, has headquarters in China, several places in Europe, in Israel, which is a United Nations creation, again, and you're like, wait, what? How does the
Mm-hmm.
Indiana Economic Development Commission have all of the, well, it's because this is all coming from the UN, the World Economic Forum, the Trilateral Commission, the CFR,
Yes.
all of these usual suspects. You have to remember that, yeah, they have all these different names, but it's all the same players that are members of all these same boys clubs.
Indeed.
I say boys clubs. There are girls involved too, but especially boys.
Well, I think that's a good stopping point at on the 15-minute cities. We can pick back up next time. Look for the next video, part 2 of an interview with Rebecca Terrell. We're going to finish up this conversation on 15-minute cities and the evil that is the UN, apparently. And so this has been a gentleman's review. Please like, share, and subscribe to bringing you the news that the mainstream propaganda does not. Thank you.